Hey everyone, and welcome to another episode of Get to Know Your Neighbor, an interview show where we feature people from Long Hill and you guys get to know them a little bit better. I'm your host, Tiffany Oshinsky. Today we are featuring the president of the Long Hill Historical Society, Guy Roshto. Thank you so much for joining me, Guy.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure for me.
It's a pleasure for me to have you on here because when we did our pre-interview, you were fascinating, and so I'm so excited for this interview. So I want to start, though, with the Long Hill Historical Society. You've been there for 10 years now. Why did you join, and what has kind of kept you there?
So I got sort of roped into joining. My wife is a longtime resident of Long Hill Township. She and I are both very interested in history, just to begin with. We bought a house that was very historic. It's the oldest house in Long Hill Township. And through that, the historian we happened to meet said, why don't you get involved? And so we started getting involved, and it just came to be. It was a natural fit for us.
So why history? What is it about history that got you even excited about this, that made you want to even buy the old historical house here in town?
I think history kind of tells you where you've been and where you're going. It's strange for me because I always tend to think future. I'm very interested in technology and where we're going and how we're going to get there. And history is that lesson for me. It tells me, oh, this is what people stumbled on and this is what they did well. And I'm just fascinated how the dynamics, social interactions with people and why they came to a certain place, Long Hill Township, and just what motivated them to build our town the way it's been built up over the years.
Have you been interested in other towns' local history, or did you kind of stumble upon Long Hill's history and got sucked into that?
Totally interested in Long Hill history. I'm starting to get a little bit branching out, more involved in the county level history of Washington and that part of our life, the Revolution, but not much more than that. I look at world history, kind of just an understanding of how the United States came to be. But mostly it's Long Hill Township.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of Long Hill, what's your favorite fact about Long Hill's history?
Oh my gosh, my favorite fact. That's a tough one. I think I like the whole story behind Sterling and how Sterling came to be. Most of Long Hill Township was created from, as you might imagine, from farming. It was an agricultural community and it built up from there. Sterling was a little bit different. Sterling was just a couple of farms, and then almost overnight in the late 1800s, it was bought up by a New York firm, a company that wanted to develop it. So Sterling became that town that was almost our first planned community. And you can see that in the way the streets are laid out and how things changed overnight and how the railroad interacted with that. Very interesting process, that it was all about the money and how can we make more money. But from that, a whole industry rose up, and it just is a fascinating story.
That is fascinating. I did not know that about Sterling when we initially moved here, but that's pretty cool. Now, looking at history, I want to go back and look at your history a little bit. I mean, I've only known you for a little bit, but in this time I've known you, you have been very buttoned up, you're kind and you're smart. But when we spoke before, you told me you have a very fascinating history. So can you talk about what you were like as a child and just, where you grew up and your early years in life?
Well, wow. I don't know where to start with that. Initially growing up, and I didn't know any better, I came from a very poor family. My father and mother separated. I ended up staying with my mother, and I was pretty much on my own because she was always working. It was a very rough neighborhood. Got into interesting situations growing up, which I won't bore you with much of that. But because it was a rough neighborhood, and because my mother wasn't exactly the kind of person that should be a mother, I kind of went off on my own and left. When I was 13, I left living at home and moved out on my own. My sister, who's only a few years older than me, took me in. She was 20, I'm 13, and you can imagine, a 20-year-old is not going to be able to control a 13-year-old, but that was my life growing up, was just pretty much being independent and having to struggle through a lot of issues.
What were you like in school?
So I was lucky in the sense that I had a mentor in high school. And I was also, it sounds egotistical, but I was very interested in all kinds of things related to reading, writing. Math was my main subject. When I graduated college, I graduated as an electrical engineer. And these things were just kind of natural to me. But I had no guidance other than one math teacher in high school. I was pretty much on my own, so I never studied. And it was just very lucky that I happened to be able to get through the process. When I got to college, because I never studied in high school, and in high school was pretty much very easy for me, college was just the opposite. And it took me many years to finish. I went to multiple schools, ultimately running out of money because I funded my own way through college, and having to join the military so I could continue my education.
Now, I want to get into the military aspect shortly because that is a very interesting tale, what you did in the military. But before that, you had mentioned to me that you got your pilot's license when you were younger and you flew solo at 16, which is amazing. How did you go about doing that at such a young age, especially when you were living with your sister and kind of being so independent at such a young age?
So I was always interested in flying. It was one of those things. I grew up in the decade of Apollo, and my sister was looking for something that I could attach myself to and be less involved in the bad aspects of my life, right? And so she said, why don't you try this thing called the Civil Air Patrol? I'm like, I don't know what this is, right? And I happened to have a friend in high school who was in the Civil Air Patrol. And so through that, I got engaged in this program that helps young people develop their aeronautical or military background. So I started doing that only so that I could fly airplanes. That was my only goal. I wasn't interested in the military part of that. That was just very weird to me as a teenager. I had very long hair. I had hair probably, Tiffany, as long as yours.
Really?
And I remember going into this very military kind of meeting with 20 other people, and all their hair was cut very short, very stiff, kind of rigid types of people. And I came in, I sat down, and I'm looking forward, and they asked me a question. I don't remember what the question was. I answered the question. Now I'm 14, 15, and all I can remember was when I answered, someone behind me said, "Yes, young lady, that's true." That was probably the next day I got my hair cut, was because from behind they're thinking that I'm joining as a young lady, which is fine, but not so much for me. So after that, I cut my hair and I put my nose down and followed through on flying airplanes, and I soloed on my 16th birthday, where I went to high school in Delaware. I soloed before I got my driver's license. So I was flying before I had a driver's license.
Wow, that's amazing. So now let's jump back to you going to the Army. What did you study in the Army and what were you assigned to?
So I joined the Army just so I could get the money to go to college. That was my only reason for it. I don't take direction from leadership very well. And I thought, I'm going to go into the Army and I'm probably going to get kicked out, because I just don't listen to people giving me direction. At least back then I didn't. So I needed the money to finish my college education. I was studying in Charlottesville, the University of Virginia, ran out of money. And I said, well, what am I going to do? I can't even pay for next month's rent. So I walked past this store, and sandwiched between two stores was a recruiter. And I walked into the recruiter and I said, I'll do whatever. I just want it to be a short amount of time, and I want to be able to get a college education after I get out. Oh, we have the perfect thing for you, they said. And he said, what do you think of nuclear weapons development? And I said, what? nuclear weapons? And they said, yeah, it's perfect. It's a short 2-year tour of duty and you'll be in and out. I said, okay, well, let's give it a try. So I studied nuclear weapons maintenance when I was in the Army. I spent a year in Korea in bunkers with short range nuclear weapons that were pointing towards North Korea.
Were you literally able to touch them? Were you in the same vicinity like that, or were you just sort of maintaining logs and computer codes and that kind of stuff?
We were touching the weapons, so the electronics in it, the cleaning of them, that was all us. To get to a nuclear weapon is an event all by itself. You have to go through 3 levels of security, multiple gates. Army people are pointing weapons at you. You don't know them, they don't know you. These are hardened bunkers with these massive locks on them. Dead of winter, we open the door because we're going to take one of the nuclear weapons out and clean it. We open the door, everything has frost on it except the nuclear weapon, right? So it's encased in something that you can carry with, right? But there's no frost on it, there's nothing around. And our warrant officer, which is someone who's not a complete officer, but not an enlisted person. I was enlisted. The warrant officer walks into the bunker, puts his hands over the top of it, says, oh, it's nice and warm over here. Come on and join me. He knew more about nuclear weapons than we did, but no, thank you, sir. We'll stay outside. But that's the kind of thought process these people had in Korea in 82.
Wow, that's amazing. I can't imagine. I think I would be scared out of my mind. So after the Army, like you said, you got your degree in electrical engineering. You went to Maryland. So what did you do once you graduated? What did your degree take you to?
So I started at IBM working on computers. Actually, I was the guy who was connecting the small computers to the large, big mainframe computers. This is before we had actual networks. I loved that job, but it happened to be a Navy project and the Navy project was ending. And so I had to find another job. I applied at multiple places and Motorola for me was a perfect fit. It was communication systems, which is what I live and breathe. So I joined right up. It was not even a question for me. And I've been at Motorola ever since.
And what is it about Motorola that you really enjoy that's kept you there for, 30 years has it been?
30 years. For me, when I first started, I was disappointed in where they put me. I was a sales representative. I was an engineer supporting sales. And I just am not a salesperson. I'm the engineer type of person, right? I like to design things, to build things, to create things. And my passion is software development. And so it wasn't a good fit. I was designing these radio communication systems, the towers. And so I was going out and I'm meeting a lot of these different entities, these different customers, but I wasn't really interested in trying to sell them something. I wanted to build something for them. But I remember during that time, there were a lot of interesting things like climbing up radio towers that are 300, 400 feet in the air with the wind blowing back and forth, just because the technician wanted to have a laugh at this poor engineer, this young engineer, Of course, I used to jump out of airplanes, so it was not like something bothered me.
He had no idea what he was messing with.
One of the great stories for me was my wife was eight months pregnant, almost 9 months, ready to give birth to our first child. And I was called down to Newport News, Virginia, to do an emergency repair on a cruise liner. They were docked because they had a hole in the hull and they had to get it fixed. And while they were there, they said, let's replace our radio system. So I was the engineer that was called out to do that. We did the work, great. They were happy with it. And then the captain said, would you like to sail down with me? You can pick any room you want on the whole ship because we just need to sail back down to Florida. I said, absolutely, I would love that. Called my wife and she said, are you kidding me? I'm about to give birth. I said, okay, probably not a good idea. So I didn't get to go on that cruise ship down to Florida, but it's a great story for me because I was very excited about that.
I bet. That would have been a nice little trip. But I agree with your wife. As someone who has 2 kids, I agree with your wife. So how did you end up here in Long Hill?
My wife is a native of, which was back then it was called Passaic Township. Her parents were here and her grandparents were here. They go way back. We met in college and we lived in Maryland for 10 plus years. And then my wife said, I really want to go back to Passaic Township to be closer to my parents, and my family is all around that area. It would be great if I could go. I said, absolutely. I had the kind of job at that time that allowed me, at Motorola, it allowed me to be wherever I needed to be. So I asked my boss, he said, absolutely, go ahead, and we moved. We never looked back. Passaic Township, now Long Hill Township, was always just a natural, welcoming place to be. And so I loved every minute of it. We didn't actually come to Passaic Township initially, though. We started in Parsippany because we couldn't afford living in this area. So we moved to Parsippany, and I said, I cannot live in Parsippany. This is nothing against Parsippany, but it was just a different environment, different vibe to it that I didn't enjoy. We looked around, we kept coming back to Long Hill Township. We kept wanting to be here, but because we couldn't afford it, we were sort of just starting out. It was happenstance. We found a house that was so old and so decrepit that no one else wanted it. so when the realtor took us to see our house that we live in now, we were literally stepping over people to view it. Our realtor was apologizing, saying, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have taken you. Kelly and I were looking at each other going, no, this is perfect.
Minus the people, perfect. This is great.
So we bought the house, we fixed it up, and we love it now.
That's awesome. So you had mentioned earlier your wife was a town historian. You live in you moved into an old decrepit house that's now a beautiful house in a historical location. When you and your wife first met, did you know that you two had the same love of history and local town history?
We didn't at the time. So she wasn't interested in history and I wasn't interested in history. I think really what it was is when we moved to Long Hill Township, we started becoming interested. We were always interested in learning history and what that meant, but not to the extent of joining a historical society and advocating for people to learn about history and understand where we came from. That all happened after we started getting involved in the Historical Society.
Now, along with the Historical Committee, you've also been involved with the township in other ways. So can you talk about what other roles you've had and why you decided to get involved?
Oh, what other roles? I guess I got involved first in the Communications Advisory Committee. And it was it happened to be an introduction from, at that time, the historian, which was not my wife, it was somebody else. She said to me, why don't you get involved in this? It sounds like from what you enjoy, communications, in this committee, it's a perfect fit. It was a perfect fit for me. It's the technology, it's the understanding history, it is being able to communicate with people, the art kind of aspect. I like graphic design. It's kind of a hobby for me. So all these things, video like we're doing right now, I love this stuff. I eat it up. So anyway, Communications Advisory Committee was the first introduction to township politics and government in general. I had been involved in a little bit of it when I was in high school, but then forgot all about it. I didn't what is this stuff, right? So at that point, I said, this is very interesting. And then I decided that I was going to get more involved, and I joined the township committee in 2012. And have been participating in this experiment for many, many years.
And why did you want to join the committee? Was there something about Long Hill that you wanted to try to improve, or trying to get more people involved by showing what work you're doing? Just what was the impetus behind that?
It was one topic. So I was a one topic person at that point in my life. Valley Road was being developed. At that time, there was talk about putting up a barrier because it floods in the area. So they wanted to put up a flood wall, which I was fine with. It wasn't even, for me, it wasn't an issue. It happened to be a very big issue for the town, so I kept getting pulled into it. But the aspect of a flood wall brought on talk of development on Valley Road, building more homes above businesses, retail on Valley Road. I thought it was the wrong place to put it. I thought that's a great thing for Sterling, for Main Street, but not for this long 1.5 mile road. And that was the thing that made me decide I'm going to run for township committee, to try to at least tell people where I believe we should do the development, as opposed to not do development, not in a flood zone, not on a 1 mile long road. I was lucky enough that enough people listened and joined in 2012.
You have a family and you've lived here for a while and you've had such a wonderful, amazing life. What do your kids think about everything that you've done?
What do they think? They think that every time I tell a story, my daughter says, "Dad, I've never heard that story before." It seems like every time you tell a story, it's something else, something I've never known. And I say, yeah, well, I've had a lot of these stories. I've lived in so many places and done so many different things that you get these stories. But my children are just amazing. I was very, very lucky. I have a daughter and my son, who's 3 years younger than her. And my daughter was always kind of like me, very independent, thinking exactly what I want to do. And my son was always wanting me involved in school activities with him, and chess club and traveling soccer. So I was coaching that for him. All these things that just get you more involved in the town, which I loved, and also staying engaged with my children. It was a wonderful time. I look back on that and I just think the only thing better than the time with my children is the time with my grandchildren. And this new world for me opened up last year. My daughter had twins and I just love that.
I was just about to ask you what it's like to be a grandfather for the first time.
It's not explainable, because I thought being a parent and having your children a year old, holding them in your arms, I thought that was enough, right? I could just say, oh, you'll understand once you're a parent. It's different. And it's not because, people always joke, well, oh, that's because you can just hand them back to the parents and you can walk away. Yeah, maybe that's a little true, but really it's just, you see your children through a different lens. And I love that I see my daughter as a mother, and that the interaction with her and my grandchildren, and then being able to just enjoy it. It just is a wonderful. I can't explain the experience.
So for the last question, is there anything else that you want to share with the residents of Long Hill, whether about yourself or about the Historical Society or about Long Hill's history in general?
I'd say for me, getting involved is a very rewarding. Sometimes it's just challenge, because there's a lot of dynamics with people that you have to be able to handle. It's just been so rewarding. I would suggest to anyone who might be listening to get involved. It's very easy, welcoming community, and whatever you're interested in. Maybe you're interested in a nonprofit like a historical society, or starting your own nonprofit that helps the town in some way, or just coming to a meeting and hearing about what's happening in our town, a township committee meeting or a planning board meeting or a historical society event that's being held. Any of these things, just knowing the people around you is an opportunity to grow, and it's very rewarding for individuals. So I highly encourage people to get involved.
Well, that's awesome. Well, thank you so much, Guy. I really appreciate it. But now we need to do the best part, which is the lightning round. The way that the lightning round works is that I'm going to ask you a series of actual get-to-know-you questions, and you're going to answer them as fast as you can. Are you ready?
I'm going to try.
All right. If you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be?
New Jersey.
Really?
This is where my family is. So.
That's a good answer. What is your biggest pet peeve?
Oh, I would say people that talk too much.
What would you sing at karaoke night?
Probably a lot of Jackson Brown.
Oh, interesting. What is your favorite holiday?
My favorite holiday, oh boy, Thanksgiving.
What is the most unusual thing you've ever eaten?
Ever eaten?
Ever eaten.
I would say escargot, probably.
What is your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? I'd say The Matrix is the most memorable movie I've seen.
It's a good movie. Growing up, who was your first celebrity crush?
I don't think I had a celebrity crush. I remember the Charlie's Angels, the dark
Farrah Fawcett?
Not Farrah Fawcett. No, did not like Farrah Fawcett. The dark-haired one in Charlie's Angels.
Okay, I don't know her name. I didn't watch the original. What is your favorite book?
I'd say the most impactful for me would have been The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell.
If you could join any music group, past or present, which group would you want to join?
A music group? I'd say the Eagles.
What would your superpower be if you were a superhero?
I probably have to say Superman.
You would want the powers of Superman?
Yeah, being able to fly would be just amazing.
All right, well that is it for Get to Know Your Neighbor. Thank you so much, Guy, for taking the time to speak with me and for letting us get to know you a little bit better.
It was fun, Tiffany. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
If you know someone who should be featured on Get to Know Your Neighbor, drop us an email at longhillmedia@longhillnj.gov. Put Get to Know Your Neighbor in the subject and tell us why this person should be featured on our show. Be sure to include your contact information as well as the contact info of the person you're suggesting.